Would you believe me if I told you that there's a country in the world that holds the world's biggest mirror, sits atop a literal mountain of silver, and speaks over 37 languages? I know right now you're probably picturing a land of extremes. And honestly, you'd be right, because that's essentially what Bolivia is. And in this video, we're going on an epic journey to unlock its history, explore its geography, get an inside look at its political and economic landscapes, and get to know the people's culture. So before anyone else arrived, the Altiplano was buzzing with powerful civilizations. You had the Aymara people, who formed one of the big early kingdoms, but the major history maker, that was definitely the Inca Empire. These guys were expanding from Peru, and by 1438, they had swallowed up this region, which they called Kulasuyu, and incorporated it into their massive empire. I mean, we're talking about connecting huge territories and managing around 12 million people. They were organizational geniuses and incredible builders, right? But even a massive, incredible empire like the Incas had an expiry date, and that date was 1532. Suddenly you have a Spanish conquistador named Francisco Pizarro showing up, and he managed to topple this gigantic empire with fewer than 200 men by basically hitting them when they were down, exploiting a brutal civil war between the half-brothers Huasca and Atahualpa. Plus a smallpox epidemic was already wreaking havoc. Pizarro captured and then executed Atahualpa, and just like that, the Spanish spent the next decade cementing their power. The newly conquered land was rebranded as Upper Peru. Initially, it was just kind of a forgotten corner of the Spanish viceroyalty. Until 1545, they struck the ultimate jackpot with the Cerro Rico at Potosi, which literally means rich hill. This mountain was practically made of silver, sitting about 14,000 feet or more than 4,000 meters above sea level. This single discovery fundamentally changed the entire world economy, because Potosi exploded, becoming one of the biggest, wealthiest cities in all the Americas by 1650. Believe it or not, that silver fueled the Spanish crown's global power for 3 centuries. But let's be clear here, that wealth came at a price. It was extracted through the brutal, forced labour of the indigenous people, costing countless lives. And that's a part of the story we can't forget. Centuries later, as Spain got distracted by Napoleon in the early 1800s, the fever for independence spread. The first shouts for freedom in Upper Peru were heard early, back in 1809, but it wasn't a quick fix. It took a brutal 16 years of fighting. And the eventual victory, it was secured by the legendary Simón Bolívar and his forces, and on August 6, 1825, a new country was named in his honour, Bolivia. They were finally free. But hold on, the drama wasn't over, because independence didn't magically bring stability. The 19th century became a tough series of political messes, and, heartbreakingly, huge losses of land. The most devastating blow was the War of the Pacific, from 1879 to 1884, against Chile. They were fighting over the valuable, mineral-rich Atacama coastal desert. Bolivia lost, and what was the consequence? They had to surrender their entire coast, making them landlocked. And sadly, the losses kept piling up. They lost the rubber-rich Acre province to Brazil in 1903, and then came the tragic Chaco War from 1932 to 1935 against Paraguay. Fought over a remote, difficult territory, it was a total disaster that saw huge casualties, especially among the ill-equipped indigenous conscripts from the highlands. In the end, they lost even more territory. But here's the silver lining. This devastating defeat woke people up. It created the Chaco generation, a group of veterans and citizens who were suddenly highly politicized and absolutely demanded real change for the country. That intense hunger for change finally erupted in 1952 with the Bolivian National Revolution. Led by the MNR party, also known as the Nationalist Revolutionary Movement, and Victor Paz Estensoro, the people successfully overthrew the military regime. And with their victory came huge, sweeping reforms like universal adult suffrage. They also nationalised the tin mines, and they implemented massive land redistribution. It was an intense 12-year period where the country tried to modernise fast. But you know how it goes in politics. That period of reform was eventually derailed. So from 1964 onward, the country was battered by repeated military coups and uprisings. You've heard of Che Guevara, right? He was actually killed here in 1967 while trying to kickstart a peasant rebellion. Not only that, but generals like Hugo Banzer Suarez kept popping up and taking power, creating decades of instability until the military finally handed things back to a civilian government in 1982. Let's fast forward a bit, past the collapse of the tin market in 1986 and all those economic struggles, because the biggest historical shift in the modern era happened in 2005 with the election of Evo Morales. Get this, a socialist leader and former coca grower became Bolivia's first ever indigenous president. That's a massive moment in their history because the majority population's finally seeing themselves truly represented at the highest level. His government immediately got to work, nationalising the gas industry in 2006 to put the nation in control of its energy wealth. And in 2009 they approved a new constitution that gave even more rights to the indigenous majority. Even though his time in office had its ups and downs and a brief crisis, his party, MAS, or Movimiento al Socialismo, showed its lasting political strength by returning to power in 2020. See? From ancient giants and a mountain of silver to devastating wars and a powerful indigenous political revival, Bolivia's history is absolutely epic. Next up, we're talking about the incredible geography of this diverse nation. You won't believe the landscapes we're about to explore. Seriously, this country is one of the most physically diverse places on Earth, and it's all thanks to the mighty Andes Mountains. But before that, Bolivia borders 5 countries: Brazil, Peru, Chile, Argentina, and Paraguay. Plus, it's got an area of about 424,000 square miles, or 1.099 million square kilometres. Now that we know its neighbours, we can step inside this country and break down its 3 distinct geographical zones. Our journey begins way up high, in the western part of Bolivia, which is dominated by the colossal Andes Mountains. Here, sandwiched between the main eastern and western mountain ranges, is the Altiplano. This place is a record breaker. It's one of the world's highest inhabited regions, running for about 500 miles, or 805 kilometres, and sitting at altitudes from 12,000 to 14,000 feet, or 3,660 to 4,270 metres above sea level. Can you imagine living and breathing up there? That's why the major economic engine here is mineral wealth. Places like Potosí and Oruro sit near rich deposits, fueling Bolivia's economy. Right up on the northern border, you'll find the stunning Lake Titicaca, and it's often called the world's highest lake navigable by large commercial vessels. Sitting at around 12,500 feet, or 3,810 metres. This lake is crucial, as the area around it is the most populated and agriculturally productive part of the high plateau, home mostly to the Aymara and Quechua people. And speaking of extremes, if you head south on the Altiplano, you hit the Salar de Uyuni. This is the world's largest salt flat, covering over 4,086 square miles, or 10,582 square kilometres. It's a vast, flat, surreal landscape that becomes the world's biggest natural mirror when lightly covered with water. It's truly mind-blowing. Now, as you start to descend the eastern slopes of the Andes, everything changes. You move into a transitional zone known as the Yungas and the temperate Vaz. Altitude drops dramatically here. The air is warmer, the climate is temperate, and suddenly you have an agricultural paradise. But that's not all. This is also where they grow cash crops like coffee, cacao, citrus, sugarcane, and, famously, coca. Besides those, this zone is also home to cities like Cochabamba, Sucre, which is one of the 2 capitals of Bolivia, and Tarija. They thrive in these milder valleys. Finally, we hit the lowest, vastest zone, the Llanos or the tropical lowlands, covering more than 2/3 of Bolivia. You're now firmly in the heart of the Great Amazon River Basin. Major rivers, including the Mamoré, Beni, and Madre de Dios, flow through here, acting as essential waterways. And in terms of the climate, it's pretty hot, humid and tropical. Much of this area is sparsely populated and still largely undeveloped, featuring huge stretches of rainforest, open grasslands and wetlands. But there are massive exceptions. For instance, the city of Santa Cruz, the largest and fastest growing city in Bolivia, is located right here in the Llanos. It's a huge centre for petroleum and natural gas industries, and a major agricultural hub, especially for livestock. So, turning now to the political tension, it's absolutely boiling over, and it's all wrapped up in a deepening economic crisis. Let me tell you more about that. The ruling Mass Party is essentially at war with itself. You've got the current president, Luis Arce, facing off against the former Radical Party leader, Evo Morales. While Arce seems to have the upper hand after a late December court ruling that barred Morales from ever running again, the fight is far from over. Morales still has enough followers to instigate massive protests, which raises the risk of social unrest disrupting business operations. And politically, this mass split is crippling. Neither faction nor the right-wing opposition has enough votes in Congress to pass any real legislation. We are talking about extremely high governability risks. Now, that high political risk is combining with a terrifying financial picture. The main problem is that the country's dollar reserves have run out, so they can't maintain the fixed exchange rate of $6.96. Back in 2014, when the commodity boom was at its peak, the central bank had foreign reserves worth $13.46 billion. By 2022, that had plunged by an astonishing 94.7% to just $709 million. And now those liquid reserves are down to what they call the tens of millions. So if you can't back your money with real dollars, what happens? A black market, or what they call a parallel market, explodes. That's exactly what's been happening since early 2023. On the street, a dollar trades for somewhere between 15 and 18 bolivianos. Think about that. It's more than double the official price. It means the currency is likely to just break, or devalue, in an uncontrolled way. And that's a huge danger for all their banks. And what does that do to regular people? It drives inflation absolutely crazy. Imagine your money suddenly buying less and less. That's the brutal reality. Officially, inflation hit 15.5% just in the first 6 months of 2025, already more than double the yearly goal. So when you look at the whole year, prices are up over 24%, the highest they've been in 4 decades. Food prices alone, up a massive 38%. Hygiene products, a huge 41% spike. So the worry for the average Bolivian is simple. How am I supposed to make my money stretch when everything costs so much more? It's a tragic flip-flop from the good old days. When Evo Morales first took power in 2006, the whole country's GDP was only $9.55 billion, and almost 60% of people were poor. By 2019, the economy had ballooned to $40.29 billion, and poverty had dropped dramatically to just 34.6%. Pretty amazing, right? Except critics say it wasn't because of his clever rules. It was just a fortunate wave of cash from high global prices. And as of April 2025, the GDP is at $56.34 billion. And while that's an improvement, it's still not enough. So how do you fix it? You have to fix the resource policies. Their old moneymaker natural gas is drying up. Why? Because the government's rules basically kicked out all the private investors back in 2006, and that was the beginning of the end for the gas boom. But there's a new treasure: lithium. Bolivia is sitting on what many believe is the single largest deposit in the world, buried under the Salar de Uyuni. We're talking an estimated 21 million metric tons of this metal that powers our phones and electric cars. But getting it out is the problem. The government decided the state-owned company, YLB, had to control everything, often rejecting foreign investment unless they agreed to really rigid terms. So, while their neighbours Chile and Argentina have been able to cash in on the boom, Bolivia's massive lithium wealth remains mostly untapped. That's why the 2025 election isn't just about who wins. It's a giant vote on this whole way of doing business. So, the next leader has got to make the tough choice. Finally unlock that huge lithium wealth and revive the gas industry to put some muscle back into the currency once that inevitable devaluation hits. But stepping away from the political chaos for a moment, let's look at the heart of Bolivia, its people and its culture. It's a fascinating, complex place where tradition and modernity are constantly rubbing up against each other. The easiest way to understand Bolivian daily life is that it's divided along economic and class lines. You have the middle and upper classes, mostly in the cities, aspiring to Western ideals. They're at the malls, the supermarkets, the flashy discotheques, and hooked up to satellite TV with all the telenovelas and game shows. These modern enticements are actually pulling younger people out of the countryside, feeding the rural to urban migration. But beneath that modern sheen, especially in rural and working class areas, indigenous traditions are profoundly strong. Now, one of the amazing things about Bolivia is its sheer diversity. It's one of the most linguistically inclusive countries in the world, officially recognizing 37 languages. Of course, Spanish is dominant, but you hear Quechua and Aymara constantly in the Andes, and Guarani in the southeast. And that fusion is everywhere, especially in religion. The main faith is Roman Catholicism, but indigenous spiritual beliefs have merged with it. The most powerful example is the worship of Pachamama, or Mother Earth, whose figure is often unified with the Virgin Mary in artwork, a fascinating syncretism that dates back to the Spanish conquest. This dual identity also shapes its art and architecture. The blending of indigenous and European influences has created a vibrant artistic community, celebrated in the country's great museums. I'm talking about the National Museum of Art in La Paz, and the incredible architectural treasure that is Potosi, which produced coins for Spain's American colonies. Its colonial core, with dozens of extravagant Baroque-style churches and the impressive Casa de Moneda, was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987. All this vibrant culture confirms that, despite its economic and political struggles, Bolivia remains a nation of extraordinary depth and enduring heritage. Now, if you had to choose, would you rather adventure in the stunning but cold Altiplano or the hot, humid lowlands of the Llanos? Two very different landscapes, two very different experiences. So let me know which one you'd prefer in the comments below. And as always, if you loved this video, you're going to enjoy this next one.